Today, as the session was promoted, I'm just going to run through the standards for registered training organisations 2015, and by now you should be more than familiar with the standards themselves. The document itself you can download from our website. I'm sure you all have seen a copy. Maybe yours is as dog-eared or worse than mine as you've been reading through. So all 33 pages, which is fantastic. But today I wanted to focus really on three areas, and these are three areas that particularly we found since the standards have come into play last year. April 2015 was when the standards came into play for TAC RTOs. These three issues, and you may have heard me talk about these in the past, or other officers within the Secretariat focus on these, but these three areas are the three areas causing the most niggles, I suppose, and areas where either we're finding most commonly compliance issues, or RTO struggling to really present good evidence to demonstrate that they're meeting those particular requirements. And in fact, we just had our auditors together on Friday, and amount of training again was on the agenda. And I know that we've got one of our auditors in the room. I'm not sure if there are any others, but she can certainly vouch for some of that discussion last Friday. So it's still very, very topical, validation and marketing. Marketing in particular, you'd be very surprised to hear, or you may not be surprised to hear, that a lot of your competitors are checking all of your websites. And we often get complaints from people out there, often they're your competitors, who say so-and-so down the road is advertising something and they're not following the rules. So marketing and information to learners is certainly a big issue, and continues to be a big issue since the implementation of the new standards. So we'll make a start. Amount of training. So first, couple of clauses in the standards, so clause 1.1 and 1.2 in your standards. And before I go there, just to give a quick overview, if you haven't heard this before and you are new to the standards, because I'm not sure, there might be somebody, at least somebody in the room that is new to the standards, but the standards themselves are quite a significant document. So really all that you need, it's very much, if you're familiar with the old AQTF, in comparison the new standards provide far more information to RTOs about what the requirements are, far more prescriptions. So in comparison to the AQTF, it does lead you to give you a very good idea of what the compliance requirements are. There are glossary terms at the front of the document, and there are also schedules at the back, and all of those things together are auditable. So the glossary terms, the clauses and the standards themselves, and the schedules at the back are all auditable. There is a context box sitting underneath each of the standards, and the context box is obviously to provide you some context to what the intent of each of the standards are. That's not auditable. That's really just to give the reader some clues as to what the intent of the standard is. So that's just an overview of how the document works as a whole for your reference. So amount of training is the first one, and from the discussions last Friday, I wasn't there for all of the discussions, but our auditors are saying that it's an area that RTOs are finding easier to talk about with the auditor, but not necessarily easy to provide or demonstrate that hard evidence of how they've come to an appropriate amount of training for a particular learner or learner cohort. So there's still some work to do there in RTOs, really having a closer look at, well, what's some good evidence that we can put on the table to demonstrate our compliance against these areas. There's a lot of good discussion, a lot of good examples that RTOs are using in talking about how they've arrived at the amount of training when they are confronted in an audit situation. But that conversation or that discussion alone isn't good enough. We need to see the evidence, the hard evidence, to back up that the discussion or the examples that you're using. So take a little bit of time to think more about that, and it's certainly an issue that is an issue that's been quite common across and feedback from our auditors that's occurring in the last few months.
When you say the evidence, right, can you give us examples of the evidence that you think we should be giving? Because we
I'll keep working through my slides.
So this
and
comes
then
up
might
later?
Give you, yeah, I think you might some light bulbs might come through. Yeah. And
Okay.
you might give you some hints and some clues as to what might be appropriate. Yeah,
Thank you.
Through the first part of my presentation. Yeah, because we do like to through our presentations give you some clues as to what the auditors might be looking for, and you can then put that in the context of your organisation as well. We don't, and most of you who have been around a little while, you'll know that the regulators are not going to provide templates. We're not going to tell you this is what we need and this is in the format that we need it presented. RTOs are businesses, they deliver all kinds of courses to all kinds of different client groups, so there's a lot of flexibility for you to do what suits your business and your client group. So we're not going to mandate, and the only mandate is what's in the standards. It's up to you then to determine how best to organise that information and present that information both within your own set of systems and then how you deliver that information to your learner cohorts as well. So there's a lot of freedom, a lot of flexibility, which is good for the sector. So the RTO's training and assessment strategies and practice, including the amount of training that they provide, are consistent with the requirements of the training packages and VET accredited courses and enable each learner to meet the requirements for each unit of competency or module in which they are enrolled. So you'll find that that's verbatim clause 1.1. And then 1.2 is for the purpose of clause 1.1, and some of them are a little bit wordy. The RTO determines the amount of training they provide to each learner with regard to the existing skills, knowledge, and the experience of the learner, the mode of delivery, and where a full qualification is not being delivered, the proportion of the number of units or modules being delivered. Okay, so that's essentially what the two clauses that are specific to the amount of training. 1.1, and this is another point about the standards, there's a lot of crossover across the standards. So when 1.1 says the RTO's training and assessment strategies and practices, including the amount of training provided, consistent with the training packages, etc., when you have a look at clause 1.6 in the standards, I'll just read that one out for you so you can see here what the link is that I'm referring to. That they're also informed by industry. So 1.6 is that the RTO implements a range of strategies for industry engagement. 1.5, the RTO's training and assessment practices are relevant to the needs of industry and informed by industry engagement. So the auditors will be looking for some kind of link that your training assessment strategies, including the amount of training that you've determined for that learner or that particular learner cohort, has also been informed by your industry engagement activities. So there's a link across to 1.5. Okay, so if you're already doing that and developing up your training and assessment strategies, then you're on your way. So 1.5 and 1.6 is a significant link there. So the RTO is required to have training and assessment strategies that provide an adequate amount of training for learners. And the amount of training is the amount of time it takes the learner to learn everything required for that training package, for that particular training product, okay, whether it's units of competency or at the qualification level, and you need to consider the learner's existing skills, knowledge and experience and the mode of delivery. Fundamentally, the amount of training is literally what's going to be adequate or appropriate for the learner in front of you or a cohort of learners, regardless of any of those other particular factors, because you need to be able to justify or defend why 5 hours or 5 weeks or 6 months is appropriate for you, but for Delia, she's going to take a little bit longer for different reasons. So there's no, and whilst training packages don't prescribe hours or nominal terms or anything like that, you're left to then make those judgments as a trainer or assessor for your learners. So in our, we've got a suite of fact sheets. TAC has a suite of fact sheets on its website. So there is a fact sheet on amount of training. In fact, all of the topics I'm covering today. So I do encourage you to have a closer look. So this little picture here is in our fact sheet as well, so you can go away and have a closer look at it. So it goes to the question that was asked here. So what's included in this amount of training? So what we're saying is it's the structured learning, it's time in class, it's the structured workplace experience, it's the workshop activities, it's all of those projects and assignments that the learner needs to be undertaking, any prescribed pre-reading, all of those things. Taking into consideration the learner's existing skills, knowledge and experience, the mode of delivery, and of course the number of units that they're undertaking as well, okay? What we're trying to show here is that there are all those other influences and other terminologies. So you see volume of learning in the AQF. You've got course duration, which is another term that's utilised out there, and nominal duration, which is usually a term linked to funding arrangements or funding mechanisms. So all those things obviously are going to influence the amount of training, but from our point of view and from the point of view of the standards, they actually sit to the side, okay? At the end of the day, the auditor will eyeball you and it'll be your job to defend a particular amount of training. We don't notice in the standards it doesn't talk about volume of learning or nominal durations. The words are amount of training. So you only need to determine the amount of training that's appropriate for a particular learner or learner cohort, as I've said. So Sharon's asking, the question is about assessment and whether that's included in the amount of training. And what we're saying, and it actually comes up in a slide further along, structured assessment we're saying is not included. So any assessment that's integrated, see, it's very difficult to separate assessment in competency-based training and the way that VET works. Very difficult to separate assessment often away from the training or the learning that occurs. But those instances of formal structured assessment where the learner only comes in, for example, for a 2-hour assessment, that's not included. We're saying that's not included. Okay, so we wanted to make that clear distinction. Yes? Sue's asking for a particular accredited course. Some students may take 3 months depending on their past skills and experience, and other students may take a lot longer. That's perfectly fine. You just need to be able to justify why you've been able to complete this student in 3 months and these other students in a far longer time. Absolutely. And really you want to make some reference to that in your training and assessment strategy, for example. As long as it's somewhere and it's information that you can come to easily and be able to talk to as well, within your own RTO as well. You need to have a look at those things and think about, okay, well, how am I going to justify why this person, and often it's quite reasonable and simple. It's just articulating that and pulling together the evidence to justify that. So I think this slide's important to, oh hi Vivian, this slide's important just to acknowledge that there's that other terminology out there, but the focus for the standards is the amount of training. We acknowledge that those other things are going to be influencing factors, but they're not a consideration when it comes to 1.1 and 1.2 in the standards.
Thanks, Morena. Just a quick one. You said that if someone comes in for the 2-hour assessment, that's not classed as a matter of training.
Yes.
But when people take away a long assignment that they're going to be working on, so they're sort of learning, but that's still going to be their summative assessment at the end, would that be classed in the amount of training?
Yeah, that would be included in the amount of training, absolutely. Yep. So any projects, assignments, that would be included. So what do we want to see as the regulator? That the determination of amount of training includes all of its components, and that the methodology for reaching the determination is clear. So there is no mathematical formula, okay? There isn't, we're not saying that this plus this plus this is going to give you the adequate amount of training. So stop looking for that or any guidance around that. As far as I know, there's nothing available in that way. And we're just really looking for that there's really a reasoned and thoughtful account of what extent of engagement is expected of the learner, depending on, again, the prior skills, knowledge, etc., etc. Evidence in the delivery and assessment strategy documents and unit delivery and assessment plans. As I said earlier, a place to start is your training and assessment strategy itself, okay? If your 1.1 provides the trigger to remind you that, okay, I need to include some thought to amount of training in my strategy. The RTO must be able to justify and explain the amount of training it plans to deliver and how it evaluates the adequacy of the amount of training during and after the delivery. So we're looking to see that there's some revision. So so you might find, oh, actually that was really tight for me, for us to be able to offer that particular group that course in 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is. Next time we want to adjust that and offer that longer or shorter, etc. And also it's an information to learners up front. So learners can also make a judgment themselves, okay, about whether they're going to be able to cope with the course that you're offering in the mode that you're offering, etc., the pathways that you're offering. So there'll be so that the learner is informed before they get to you, so that you don't have to deal with an issue that you hadn't actually planned for, potentially. That learners, before they enrol with you, are very, very clear, and this goes to marketing, again, linked to information to learners up front, across standards 4 and 5, that learners are very, very clear about how you intend offering that course, so that they can sign up. They mightn't sign up with you because, look, they know they're just not going to be able to cope with a short course, and maybe their preference is to go somewhere else where the course is offered over a longer period, etc., etc. So I think you get the point that if learners are aware up front what you're offering, when you're offering, the length of the course, etc., then you're less likely to come up with issues that are common amongst learners when they're finding it a little bit difficult to keep up, for example, in that case. So this is where I wanted to touch on assessment. It is considered a part of training and assessment, and learning is where learning is integrated, so assignments, projects, etc., and where these structured activities are considered as part of the assessment making process. And so, as I was saying before, structured time solely for the purpose of assessment, we're saying is not included in the amount of training. Sharon was asking, or just making an observation, I think, more than anything, or a comment that sometimes it's difficult to determine that unstructured assessment process or a component within the amount of training, and we recognise that as well. We spent a lot of time debating in the early days when the standards were coming into play how we were going to treat assessment, but we found that at the end of the day it was, in a lot of cases, very difficult to separate assessment from the learning process. So we had to land somewhere on it. So in the main, what we're saying is, and if you've got other examples, and it's really, like I said, this is a you need to present your case in an audit situation. I suppose you state your case as to why you've included some things and not others, and that's your job. But certainly the only way we've been able to simplify things in this space is to say very clearly any assessment that's very much separate to, very structured, we're saying that's not included. Everything else pretty much is. So this again is in our fact sheet as well. So it provides some guidance again to give you some clues as to what you're looking at as far as when you're offering shorter time frames for learners who potentially have existing skills and knowledge. They're currently working in the industry, for example. They've got other relevant qualifications. So it seems obvious that the amount of training will be heavily reduced for some of those people compared to those who come in as complete clean skins. They've got absolutely no knowledge and skills, potentially individuals who are just coming out of the school system, etc., etc. I think I'm probably telling you something that's pretty obvious. But sometimes putting it in or presenting it like this, hopefully where you've had some frustrations in the past around this space, this provides some guidance and helps point you in the right direction in starting to develop some good evidence in defending some cases around.
Is there an expectation from auditors, and I'm going to say auditors,
yeah, sure.
That we do have individual learning plans, like for example with the CGA, because I deliver that, we do have individual learning plans, and the amount of training would differ, quite significantly from one student to another. And there's this process in place where we do an initial placement activity, and we have an interview, and we determine what their needs are, and then design their, the amount of training. And my thinking is that this is something that we would need to be implementing, across vet courses as well. So is that, would that be part of the evidence requirements that we would need to provide?
There's no easy answer, and it's not for us, and auditors are not looking for anything specific. It's really whatever is going to work for your organisation. It has to be efficient, it has to be meaningful. Don't create documentation or evidence for the sake of creating evidence and documentation. That's absolutely not what we want. Sometimes we're out at audit, and we see some of the simplest processes and systems that are quite compliant. People know what they mean. Trainers and assessors know how those things are applied. They're easily understood. They're meaningful. And we see at the other spectrum very complex systems, very complex processes that sometimes are very difficult for trainers and assessors to understand and interpret and apply. So our message really from TAC is keep it, relevant to your business, relevant to the staff that you have. Wrap some really good instructions around those documents or templates that you're producing and implementing within your organisations, and you're more than halfway there. So really be efficient, keep it simple, look at what the standard requires, and don't overthink it, is often some of the advice that particularly comes from me. Okay, so we'll move on to assessment validation. And you'll notice this has certainly been strengthened in the standards for RTOs in comparison to the AQTF. So there's some very, very clear detail about the requirements for validation in the standards. So here we're particularly looking at clause 1.9, 1.10 and 1.11. So they're the three key clauses that we're focusing on. But also through this part of the discussion, even though we're not focusing on it, it's important that you also bring into the mix when you're looking at validation processes, you also bringing in 1.8. And 1.8 is where you're looking at the principles of evidence, okay? So you can't you can't do 1.9, 10 and 11 without considering the requirements of 1.8 as well, okay? So another area where there's integration across the standards and that they don't sit in isolation. So a little bit wordy, but forgive me. The standards now require RTOs to develop and implement a comprehensive plan, okay, keyword comprehensive, plan for the ongoing systematic validation of assessment that includes all training products on the RTO's scope of delivery. And by training product we mean it might be qualifications that you have, and some of you have only units of competency on your scope as well, or a combination of both, okay? Validate the assessment practices and judgments for each training product at least once every 5 years. Okay, so break that up. It can be a little bit overwhelming reading it all together all at once. With at least 50% of those products to be validated within the first 3 years of each 5-year cycle. And the standards go on to say, they talks a little bit more about the 50% in the 3-year cycle. Take a risk-based approach. So training products that are coming up in the next cycle that you're going to be delivering, that you've got maybe some of your main enrolments in, your high-risk training products that you really need to keep an eye on. Maybe you have a high turnover of staff, trainers and assessors in a particular area that you need to continue to be validating and looking at those, checking on those assessment outcomes and assessment processes. So whatever it is for you, again, we're not telling you how to do this. It's for you really to justify in an audit situation why you've picked certain products. And our auditors are not going to count up the number of training products on your scope and work out what 50% is. We're not going to do that. It's really a conversation and presenting your best effort as far as this is concerned. If you miss one or two, we're not going to be terribly worried about that. So please don't get terribly stressed about that. And also on that, we would also encourage you, and I might be crossing over to something I'll be talking about later on, but for larger organisation, your plan may be different for different delivery areas, okay? We find that often a one-size-fits-all for a larger organisation or medium to large organisation where you might be delivering at least more than a couple, 3 or 4 or 5 industry areas, it may be better to have validation plans that are specific to those particular industry areas, okay? Because you're also working with different requirements, different trainers and assessors, and there are a different set of needs around that. So I'd ask that you possibly consider that as a tip. Yes?
Just on the terminology of comprehensive
Yep.
plan, so obviously a schedule of when it's occurring, but under what other things are they looking for? So is it, you know, how you engage industry, what other things might come under comprehensive?
So the question is, what's comprehensive? And there's no definition for comprehensive in the standards. So it's comprehensive and as realistic and as meaningful as it is for your organisation, so that again people understand it. It's there to tell you it's more than just a flimsy list of a couple of units and this is what we plan to do, the who and the what. The plan needs to include that last one as well, who's going to be involved. So what training products are you going to be, you know, it's the what, when, how, who, it's that, okay, simply. And the last part of that, 1.11, is ensuring that validation is conducted by appropriately qualified individuals. So the requirement is quite clear there, and I think I go into the 1.11 clause requirements in an upcoming slide, so you're clear about who is able to be involved in the team or the individual requirements to be involved in the validation process. So this is an important question, and again, validation is one of our fact sheets in our suite of fact sheets on the TAC website. So we suggest this is a question that you're asking yourselves every time you're sitting down to think about your validation process. Do the assessment practices meet the requirements of the training package, and are assessment judgments being consistently applied? Okay, so when you're bringing your people together or the documentation that you're pulling together, you know, maybe it's one of those first things on the agenda that you're asking yourselves is, do the assessment practices meet the requirements of the training package? Tick. And are assessment judgments being consistently applied? That's the goal at the end of the day. It's about consistency, it's meeting the principles of assessment, rules of evidence, etc. The overall outcome of assessment validation is to ensure that assessments are valid and meet the training package or accredited course requirements. Okay, so we're not only auditing against the standards for RTOs, but we're also making sure that you're meeting the requirements of the training products themselves from the training packages or the accredited courses. Principles of fairness, flexibility, validity and reliability are met. That's the same as before, same as the old AQTF, so there's nothing new there. The evidence used to make a decision about competence is valid, sufficient, authentic, or current. Again, nothing's changed there, except if you're still using the old AQTF as a reference point, I suggest you throw it away, because the new standards, there's some slight wording changes around these areas. So by now, I would hope that you've all binned your AQTF because there were certainly some changes made to the definitions around these areas. Assessors are familiar with the outcomes being assessed. Would hope that's pretty obvious. Assessors reach accurate and consistent decisions that inform assessment outcomes. Again, this is nothing new. It's just that there's much more prescription in the new standards about what the expectations are. You should have already been doing this under the AQTF. There just weren't enough hooks or enough description or guidance within the old standards to give you some clues as to what was required. And then identifying any potential improvements to the assessment practices, that you're acting on those, you're identifying those. Often we'll see at audit where staff have scribbled over assessment tools. That's perfectly fine. You know, fairly informal processes, but you can track through and you can see where adjustments have been made and improvements have been made for future delivery and assessment.
With your last, not the last, but the second point from the bottom about consistent decisions, the implication is that you're doing some moderation as well.
Yeah.
And this whole concept of validation would include both validation prior to, where you're trialling it, and then post.
Absolutely.
Just to comment on that, because we've set up to review all of our units with starting on each session with reviewing the actual assessment itself, then going into the assessment material and then going into the judgments of assessment. And we're finding we're spending 3 or more hours on a unit going through this. Mainly, part of that is improving the units from past experience and how students are interpreting, and then, trainers sitting around then doing the judgment part of it. So combining the validation moderation under all validation has become very onerous.
Right.
So it's because before it used to be you'd have 2 separate things, and it was very clear what your task was, and they're very blended and melded, and it blows the session right out.
Which could be good, it could be bad, I don't know. I'm sure they're very good sessions amongst those trainers and assessors. It's hard for me to comment directly on that without seeing, in order to really seeing how that process actually unfolds on the ground. But there may be some possibility that could be more efficient. I don't know.
It's the linking the two. Before they used to be 2 very distinct things. So you'd have to have more documents in the one session. So you're having a sample of. And because under this as well, you can't validate your own work.
Yes.
So you have to give other trainers other people's work.
Yeah.
So you're preparing all of that, as well as all your assessment plans, all your other documents, whereas that used to be 2 very distinct things. So you weren't even going through the same amount of volume in one go, looking at the same. So you'd be split it, but we're just finding, because we're trying to get it all done for the one unit at the one time, it takes a long time.
That it is taking an extra long time. And I know it's difficult amongst RTOs to talk to other RTOs or other delivery areas that you've got access to if you're a bigger RTO. But sharing ideas, and I know it's a very difficult and very competitive market, but talking to other RTOs if you're involved in RTO networks or forums, and finding out what other people are doing as well, that could provide some insight into how your processes could be more efficient. So 1.11 talks about who can be involved in the validation process, and it does say that it can be undertaken by a team or an individual, but those people need to meet certain requirements as well. So if a team approach is used, the trainers and assessors who are directly involved in the training and delivery being validated may participate in the team. However, they can't contribute to the requirements of 1.11, which I'll go on to the next slide. And if an individual approach is used, validation must be undertaken by a person, obviously, that meets all of those requirements in 1.1. And that is that they meet these requirements here. So whether it's a team collectively, so not everybody must meet these requirements, but if it's a team approach being used, at least somebody has to tick one of these boxes. Or if it's an individual undertaking the validation, they have to meet all of those requirements. So they need to be vocationally, they need to hold vocational competencies and current industry skills relevant to the assessment being validated. They need to have current knowledge and skills in VET, and the training and assessment qualification or assessor skill set referred to at the back of the standards in Schedule 1. So that's either the Cert 4 or the assessor skill set. Okay, and you'll find that at the back of your standards document.
One of the issues that we, are debating is that is it sufficient for us to have a form of some sort where we actually say that if we've got this external validator, we've got an industry person involved to undertake the validation, and we're just sticking to say, yes, they have vocational, or do we need to have some hard evidence for auditors to justify that, yes, these people really have the vocational competencies and current knowledge, and it's that sort of thing where it gets really complex for us to determine how much evidence we need to keep to back up what we've ticked in the boxes.
Don't forget that the standards say that industry experts may be used. It's not mandatory to use industry experts. So if you're getting somebody from outside involved, fantastic, that's terrific, but it's certainly not mandated in the standards. Michaela, sorry to put you on the spot, but from that point of view where you've got outside, it's easier when you've got your own trainers and assessors, and that evidence is much more accessible. But for when there's external industry experts coming in to contribute to the validation process, the types of evidence that you would be looking to see?
It's really dependent on the role that they're taking.
Yeah.
If they are really going to be the vocational expert, then you would need to establish their competency in the same way as you would for a trainer and assessor.
Yeah.
But if they're merely there as an industry expert in terms of indicating whether the information that's being given to the students and being assessed is current, etc., then it's really probably quite a brief summary of where they fit into the industry and why they've been chosen would be sufficient. But as I say, it depends on the role that they're undertaking.
Yeah. Thanks, Michaela. Okay, so 110 states that each training product is validated at least once every 5 years, with at least 50% of products validated within the first 3 years of each 5-year cycle. And so the intent of this requirement is that over 5 years, the assessment practices and judgments of all training products on an RTO scope must be systematically validated, including those where there have been no enrolments. So plan for over your, well now actually I should have updated this slide, your registration period is 7 years. So this means that those training products are systematically validated at least over the 7-year period, once over a 7-year period. So that creates a little bit of breathing space as well. And as noted earlier, the intent of assessment validation is to establish, is the assessment process actually doing what it's supposed to be doing? So I think that's a bit of a, if you weren't already aware that, that there was a change in legislation this year and that your registration periods have been extended from 5 to 7 years.
Doesn't that 5-year period come from the standards though, not from our registration?
Oh, it does. Yes, it does. No, you're right. I'll check on that because I just wonder whether that's supposed to align to the registration period. It might actually sit with 5 years as per the standards. So go with 5 years. So is the assessment process actually doing what it's supposed to be doing? And the question needs to be answered across all stages of the assessment process. The design, including pre. So this is the 1.8 clause I was referring to as well. So whether you're purchasing assessment tools or you're designing your own, the actual conduct of assessment and the review of assessment processes post, okay? And these stages will most likely be a starting point for informing your assessment validation plan. Yes?
Hi. If you've set up your validation to be over various stages, so like a 3-step, so part of the validation is prior to using, part is after you've run it with the first group of students to see if it worked, and part of it, you know, after every couple of years or so as part of a formal thing. Does each step of that validation need to be with the meet all the requirements for the validation team, or can the validation team be met by the end of all of those steps?
Good question. It has to be at every step. It would, no, that I don't know. Or just pre it doesn't, sorry, pre it doesn't of course. No, pre it doesn't, absolutely. For 1.8, no. Those requirements, absolutely not. No. And it says that in the statute. And it says that, exactly. So those requirements are only in reference to 1.9, 10 and 11. So 1.8 is the pre, and those requirements don't apply. Yes, and I apologise if there was any confusion there. So again, all assessment resources, whether purchased or designed internally, must be validated prior to use, and that's 1.8. And we're suggesting a mapping document may be useful. You don't have to, but it's often a fairly common evidence tool that RTOs are able to compile fairly easily to demonstrate compliance there. During use, an RTO's assessment validation plan may include monitoring of the use of assessments by assessors to ensure they are implemented appropriately and are being used in accordance with the principles of assessment and the rules of evidence. The application stage of assessment validation may also verify assessors are familiar with assessments and the outcomes they are assessing. That's, you know, during the process. The assessment process, and evidence sampling should be ongoing through the assessment process, and this allows for assessment judgments before summative decisions are made. So some of these things are just some clues. I'm sure you're already doing some of these things. It's a matter of formalising these things if you haven't already. And then post-use, just quickly, it's the review. It's the ongoing review, making adjustments where necessary. And just to be clear, and it is in our fact sheet as well, where you're validating a whole qualification or a skill set, assessment practices and judgments of at least 2 units of competency must be validated. So we're not asking for you to validate every single unit of competency on a qualification, so that takes a bit of pressure off as well. And this is the kind of evidence that we would be looking to see, that you're maintaining records of your assessment validation activities. Okay, so keep your evidence that identifies the who in the assessment validation process, whether it's an individual or a group of people, including their quals, industry skills and vet knowledge, as Michaela said before, is very much dependent on who's being involved. The sample tool itself, the assessment validation tools used, all assessment samples that have been considered, and again this will be part of the sampling approach, and the outcomes. And again, where you've made some adjustments, any notations you've made or evidence to show where there's been adjustments or some changes to improve that process in the future. Vivian?
Yes, thanks, Morena. Just a question about the assessments. Does it have to be every assessment or just a sample of the assessment? So if there was 4 or 5 assessments before you made your judgment, do you have to show that each one of those has been validated?
Sample.
Sorry?
Sample.
Just a sample. So if you've got 4 or 5 assessments, so to helping you make that decision of judgment?
No. Thanks. No, it would be all, sorry. Yeah. Every judgment, yeah. Every piece of evidence that makes the judgment. Okay, and I just want to move on to marketing with the few minutes that we've got left. And as I started earlier, this is a common issue that comes up particularly through our complaints processes. So there's a comprehensive list of requirements at clause 4.1, and this also goes to information to learners. So page 21 and then over the page to the top of 22 of the standards. Very, very long list of expectations around your marketing practices. And like I said at the beginning of the presentation, your competitors are watching your websites and they're letting us know where you may have tripped up. So, we've actually just undertaken an internal review of websites for TAC RTOs. And we're going to extend that to include newspaper advertising and other types of mediums that you're using as well. It's quite a common issue, and there's a lot of misleading advertising or marketing practices out there in our space. So just a tip there, you might want to just have a tidy up of some of your website content. I know for larger organisations sometimes it can be very tricky to keep your web content up to date, but it's very important that you only advertise training products that are on your scope of registration. Big no-no and a breach of the legislation actually to be advertising products that aren't on your scope of registration. It's potentially a major breach.
If we have been found to be non-compliant, would you let us know about that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yes. This lady was asking if through our internal review process, if we see that there's something not quite right. Often those issues are fixed fairly quickly, so we wouldn't necessarily undergo a full audit process. So things like fixing up a logo that should be there, or taking a logo away from something, a document or a brochure or something where it shouldn't be, those sorts of things can be fixed quickly, and if you fix them quickly, then that's not an issue. It's those providers who ignore our request to make sure that their marketing mediums reflect the requirements. It's those ones that often escalate. So you're all doing the right thing, aren't you? So the primary audience for marketing is prospective learners. Again, linking to your training assessment strategies, amount of training, all those sorts of things. So there's a real emphasis in the standards to make sure that learners are informed and protected. Okay, so that's really the focus when you see that long list of requirements under Standard 4 and going into Standard 5. It's that learners know what they're getting themselves into, they know what the fees are, they know where to find your policies, they know who they can talk talk to if they've got an issue. They know your complaints process. They know where they can go. It's about transparency and you providing clear information to learners so that they can make an informed choice before they enrol with your organisation, because once you got them, and if they're a problem child, they're very difficult to move on. So if you get that information clear and relevant up front, learners can make an informed choice. Again, Standard 5 outlines a number of specific requirements that must be provided to learners prior to enrolment and commencement of training and assessment, and there should be enough information there so that your learners can make an informed choice, as I've already said, and I don't apologise for emphasising that. It's really important that there's clarity in the information that you provide. Some of the issues that we're finding, particularly through our internal review processes and through our audit mechanisms as well, our external audits, is not including the training product code. So just a reminder, when you're promoting courses, that you, as per how they're presented in TGA, code first, then the title. Not distinguishing between accredited and not accredited training is a really common issue. So be very clear so learners know what they're signing up for is either an accredited course, as in nationally recognised training, whether it be a training package, training product or an accredited course, and distinguishing where those training products that you're offering are not. Okay, it needs to be very clear. Not including your RTO code on all your marketing. Not clearly identifying partnership arrangements. Again, this is really, really important and will be a focus for the council coming up into this next financial year. Where you outsource services is a really high-risk area. We've seen through past strategic industry audits where there have been significant issues and high-risk issues around that. So learners need to be absolutely clear if they're enrolling with you and you've outsourced part of your services, that they know that. And they know that potentially they won't see you or your name or your logo until you're issuing the final certification, either be it a statement of attainment or qualification. Sometimes learners actually will have undertaken training and assessment with a third party, not realising that they actually aren't with the actual RTO. So it's really important that learners know that up front, and we do receive complaints in that regard where people have felt that they haven't, that the RTO hasn't been open and transparent in that regard. Advertising training products that aren't on scope, I mentioned this before, is a serious breach of the legislation. So please check your websites and take anything down that doesn't represent what you're approved to deliver. And again, not enough information to learners regarding partnership arrangements. So that's a really important point. And there is a requirement in the standards that you let the regulator know where you have partnership third-party arrangements in place. And there is a requirement in the standard that those third-party arrangements are subject to a written agreement. So where you have written agreements in place, you need to let the regulator, if you're with TAC or ASQA, you need to let us know who those agreements are with. You don't need to supply the actual agreement, we just need to keep a register of those agreements that you have. I just wanted to point you to our website, and we've got the user's guide, a suite of fact sheets, and those of you who are with TAC, you'll know you have a registration contact in the office through relevant people within your organisation. So please call us up. If we don't know the answer straight away, we'll certainly find out and get back to you quickly, which I'm sure most of you have experienced a fairly good level of service from the Secretariat office. So thank you very much. And I think before we finish up, Michaela has a point.
Just one point on your marketing information for for standard 4 or 5. Just make sure it reflects your practice as well.
Yeah.
The number of times I will see a training and assessment strategy that's got the units of competency that you're going to deliver, and that doesn't get reflected on the website, or vice versa. So whatever you're advertising must reflect practice, and that's where the auditors will specifically be looking.
Thank you. Sometimes those things don't line up, and that creates a non-compliance. So thank you very much for your attention today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'm more than happy to stay a while if you have any questions. Thank you.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.